Her dream internship is stolen by her sister who fakes credentials. When the truth surfaces, she must decide whether to expose her or let the family reputation crumble. The thick, cream-colored envelope sat on the mahogany console table, the embossed gold seal of the Miller archive catching the morning light like a taunt. I didn't even have to open it to know it was the acceptance for the most coveted historical internship in the country, an appointment I had spent 4 years of my life earning with blood, sweat, and silent obsession. But as I reached out, my fingers went numb. The name printed in elegant, sweeping calligraphy wasn't mine. It was Elena's, my sister, who couldn't tell a primary source from a tabloid magazine if her life depended on it. In that single moment, I realized my entire future hadn't just been delayed. It had been hijacked by the person I was supposed to trust most in the world. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock, but my mind was a storm of static. I slid the letter out of the envelope, my breath hitching as I read the justification for her hire. The committee raved about her groundbreaking thesis on the colonial land registries, a paper I had written over 6 months of sleepless nights. They praised her meticulous volunteer work at the county museum, where I had spent my weekends covered in dust while she was out at the lake. She hadn't just stolen a job, she had peeled off my skin and draped it over herself to parade around as a scholar. The betrayal felt physical, a cold knot tightening in my chest that made it hard to draw air. I heard the back door creak open and the light melodic hum of Elena as she came in from the garden. She walked into the entryway, her cheeks flushed with health, looking every bit the golden child our parents worshipped. She saw me holding the letter and didn't flinch. Instead, she offered a slow, cat-like smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, good, it arrived," she said casually, reaching out to pluck the paper from my trembling hand. "Don't look so shocked, Clara. You've always said I needed a real career. I just decided to take your advice." There was no apology, no shame, only the chilling entitlement of a sister who had spent a lifetime taking my clothes, my time, and now my soul. The kitchen soon became a stage for my greatest performance of restraint. It was Sunday, the day our extended family gathered for a heavy roast and heavier expectations. My mother was fluttering about, adjusting the lace tablecloth, while my father sat in his recliner, his breathing labored but his eyes bright with anticipation. Elena waited until everyone was served, until the room was filled with the clinking of silverware, before she dropped the bombshell. "I have some news," she announced, her voice honey-sweet. "I've been appointed as the lead intern for the Miller archive. I start on Monday." The reaction was instantaneous. My mother let out a sharp cry of delight, nearly dropping the gravy boat. "The Miller archive? Oh, Elena, that's elite. We always knew you had a brilliant mind hidden under all that social butterfly energy." My father reached across the table, his hand shaking slightly as he squeezed Elena's arm. "That's my girl," he rasped, his face glowing with a pride I hadn't seen in years. "The Miller name carries weight. This puts our family back where we belong. You've made us proud, Ellie." I sat there, the steady, quiet sister, watching them toast to a fraud while I chewed on food that tasted like dust. Every time Elena winked at me over her wine glass, a new layer of my resentment turned into a hard, cold diamond of resolve. As the evening wore on, the weight of our family legacy began to press down on me. After dinner, my father asked me to walk him to the porch. His health had been declining for months, a failing heart that made every emotional shock a potential danger. As we looked out over the darkened yard, he leaned heavily on my shoulder. "You know, Clara," he whispered, "I was worried about the family reputation. Things have been lean. But with Elena at the archive, we're relevant again. It's a miracle. I can rest easy knowing you girls are set." I looked at his frail profile and realized I was trapped. If I spoke the truth now, if I exposed the theft, I wouldn't just be ruining Elena. I would be the one who broke my father's heart and shattered his last bit of hope. The social cost of the truth felt higher than the cost of the lie. Our town was small, and the Miller internship was already being whispered about as the ultimate success story. If the truth surfaced that Elena had faked her way in using my credentials, the scandal would cling to our name forever. We would be the family of grifters, the sisters who fought over a scrap of prestige. I saw the trap Elena had set for me. She knew I loved our father too much to kill him with the truth, and she knew I cared too much for the family name to drag it through the mud. She was banking on my goodness to protect her malice. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, the injustice of it all vibrating in my bones. I thought about the hours I spent in the library, the sacrifices I made, and how easily she had swept them off the table. But as the sun began to peek through the curtains, my anger shifted. It became something sharper, something calculated. She wanted to live my life, I would let her. I would let her step into a world of rigorous academic standards, ancient Latin texts, and high-pressure authentication that she wasn't remotely prepared for. A stolen life is a heavy thing to carry, and eventually the weight of it would cause her to stumble. I walked into her bedroom the next morning. She was already up, laying out an expensive suit she'd bought with our mother's credit card. She looked at me, her expression guarded, expecting a lecture or a tearful plea. "I'm not going to stop you," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "In fact, I'm going to help you. You don't know the first thing about the Miller collection, Elena. You'll be found out in 48 hours if you don't have someone telling you what to do." She blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in my tone. "You'd really do that? For the family?" she asked, a hint of her usual arrogance returning. I nodded, though the help I intended to give was a slow-acting poison. I wanted to be her shadow, the one who fed her just enough information to keep her head above water while I waited for the perfect moment to pull her under. I wanted to watch her try to inhabit my mind and see the exact moment she realized she was a hollow shell in a room full of substance. "For the family," I lied, and as we shook hands, I felt the first true spark of a dark, vengeful satisfaction. The game had begun, and Elena had no idea that I was the one holding the deck. The first Monday of the internship felt like watching a slow-motion collision. I stood by the window of our shared upstairs hallway, watching Elena climb into her car, dressed in a silk blouse I had bought for my own graduation. She looked the part, polished, vibrant, and utterly hollow. As the taillights disappeared down the driveway, I went to my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't have a job to go to, but I had a student to teach. I spent the morning preparing cheat sheets for her, simplifying complex archival methodologies into bite-sized talking points she could parrot back to her superiors. It was a strange, masochistic exercise, feeding the beast that had eaten my future. By Wednesday, the frantic phone calls began. My phone buzzed against the nightstand at 11:45 p.m. When I answered, Elena's voice was a jagged whisper, stripped of its usual bravado. "Clara, what is a fonds? Mr. Miller asked me to reorganize the Sterling family collection using the original fonds, and I just nodded like a mannequin. I'm hiding in the bathroom. Tell me what to do." I sat up in the dark, a cold sense of triumph blooming in my chest. I explained the concept slowly, like I was speaking to a child, listening to the frantic scratching of her pen on the other end. "It's not just a folder, Elena," I said, my voice dripping with forced patience. "It's about the organic whole of the records. If you mess this up, you'll ruin 100 years of history." The silence on the other end was delicious. She was beginning to realize that the keys to the kingdom were useless if you didn't know how to turn the locks. The following week, I decided it was time to see the lion in his den. I packed a small insulated bag with a chicken salad sandwich and a thermos of tea. Elena had forgotten her lunch, a perfect excuse for me to breach the hallowed halls of the Miller archive. When I stepped through the heavy oak doors, the scent of vanilla, old paper, and floor wax hit me like a memory of a home I had never been allowed to live in. I found Elena's office, a cramped but elegant space filled with boxes of uncatalogued letters. She was sitting behind the desk, looking overwhelmed, her hair slightly frayed. "Clara, what are you doing here?" she hissed, jumping up. But before she could usher me out, a shadow fell across the doorway. Arthur Miller was exactly as I had imagined. Tall, silver-haired, with eyes that looked like they could read the fine print on a soul. He looked at me, then at the lunch bag, and then back to Elena. "And who is this Elena?" he asked, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. "My sister, Clara," Elena stammered, her face turning a blotchy red. "She's just dropping things off." I didn't leave. Instead, I let my gaze wander to the open box on the table. "Is that the 1892 maritime correspondence?" I asked softly, stepping closer. Mr. Miller's eyebrows shot up. "It is. Most people find the handwriting too erratic to bother with." I smiled, feeling a spark of the passion that had driven my studies for years. "It's not erratic if you understand the clerk was likely suffering from a tremor in his right hand. If you cross-reference it with the medical ledgers from the same wharf, the patterns become clear." For 10 minutes the room belonged to me. I spoke about the ethics of restoration and the delicate balance of preserving the intent of the original author. I forgot Elena was there until I saw her reflection in the glass of a bookcase. She was staring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. Mr. Miller, however, was leaning against the doorframe, his chin in his hand. He looked at Elena, who was standing mute and confused, and then back at me. "Fascinating," he said, his voice trailing off. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. A sharp, analytical doubt. He was a man who spent his life spotting forgeries, and he had just realized the brilliance he had hired was sitting in the wrong chair. As the weeks turned into a month, the deception began to bleed into our home life. The Miller family was hosting their annual Midsummer Gala, a high-stakes event where Elena was expected to give a keynote address on the future of the past. She came to me in tears, her entitlement finally turning into desperation. "I can't do it, Clara. They want a 15-minute speech. I don't even know what I'm supposed to be talking about. Please, just write it for me. I'll give you anything." I spent 3 nights crafting that speech. I poured my heart into it, using every poetic turn of phrase and deep historical insight I possessed. It was a masterpiece, but it was a Trojan horse. Within the beautiful prose, I wove in incredibly specific, obscure references to local scandals from the 1840s, details that weren't in any public book, but only in the private journals I knew were locked in the Miller vaults. If anyone asked her to elaborate on those points, she would be utterly lost. I handed her the pages, watching her eyes skim the words she didn't fully understand. "It's perfect," she breathed. "You're a lifesaver, Clara." I just nodded, thinking of the trap I had set in the 3rd paragraph. Meanwhile, our house was falling apart. With Elena working long hours and spending her evenings at networking events, she had completely abandoned her responsibilities. My father's health was precarious. He needed his medications organized, his meals timed, and someone to sit with him during his bouts of breathlessness. My mother was fraying at the edges, her anxiety manifesting in a constant nervous cleaning. "Where is Elena?" my mother asked one evening, her voice trembling as she looked at the sink full of dishes. "She promised she'd help with your father's physical therapy today." "She's at a cocktail mixer, Mom," I said, drying a plate with more force than necessary. "She says it's vital for the family name." I looked at my mother's tired eyes and felt a wave of bitterness. I was the one doing the heavy lifting, the caretaking, and the cooking while Elena was out masquerading as a genius. I had inherited the burden of being the good daughter, while she had stolen the glory of my intellect. The irony was a jagged pill to swallow. I was living her old life of domestic chore work, and she was living the dream I had built for myself. The breaking point came on a humid Thursday evening. Elena returned home from the archive, throwing her designer bag onto the kitchen table. She looked exhausted and irritable. "You didn't include the citations for the Landis papers in the notes you gave me today," she snapped, her voice shrill. "Mr. Miller asked for them and I looked like an idiot." "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" I stopped stirring the soup and turned to face her. "I'm sorry, Elena. I'm a bit busy managing Dad's heart monitor and making dinner. Maybe you could have looked them up yourself? You are the lead intern after all." She stepped toward me, her face contorting with a sudden, ugly rage. "Don't you dare get high and mighty with me. You're just jealous because I'm the one in the office and you're the one in the apron. You think you're so much smarter than me, but look at us. I'm the success story. You're just the help. You're trying to sabotage me because you can't stand that I won." She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't grateful. She truly believed she deserved the fruits of my labor simply because she was bold enough to steal them. The last shred of sisterly loyalty I held, the part of me that wanted to protect my father from the truth, snapped like a dry twig. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a person who would step on my grave if it gave her a better view. "You're right, Elena," I said, my voice eerily calm, the anger in my heart solidifying into a cold, sharp blade. "I am the help, and you're the star. I'll make sure your speech for the gala is unforgettable." She huffed, satisfied that she had put me in my place, and swept out of the room. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the steam from the soup rising around me. My plan was no longer about survival or protecting the family. It was about justice. She had invited me into her lie, thinking I was a supporting character in her story. She had no idea that I was about to rewrite the ending. I realized then that I didn't have to push her. I just had to stop holding her up. The gala was only 3 days away, and I knew exactly which string to pull to make the whole puppet show fall apart. The morning of the final presentation arrived with a sky the color of bruised slate. I stood in the kitchen, carefully sliding a blue leather folder into Elena's briefcase. She was too busy checking her reflection, smoothing out a silk dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She didn't even look at the contents. She didn't see the yellowed edges of the original manuscripts or the dated watermarks of my university's library. She just saw her ticket to a permanent position. I watched her hand close over the handle, and for a fleeting second, a cold shiver of doubt raced through me. If I did this, there was no going back. The family name would be dragged through the mud, and my father's pride would be the first casualty. But then I remembered the way she had called me the help, and my hand stayed steady. We arrived at the Miller archive together. The atmosphere inside the grand reading room was stifling, thick with the scent of aged vellum and the weight of centuries of secrets. Hushed voices echoed off the vaulted ceilings as the board members took their seats. Mr. Miller stood at the front, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Elena. He gave a curt nod, a signal for her to begin. I took a seat in the back row, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I felt like a spectator at my own execution, or perhaps, the execution of the person I used to be. Elena walked to the podium, her chin held high, the blue folder resting on the lectern like a dormant explosive. "Thank you all for coming," Elena began, her voice projected with that practiced, effortless charm that had always been her greatest weapon. "The research I am presenting today represents years of quiet dedication to the Miller legacy." She opened the folder. As she began to speak, reciting the words I had meticulously ghostwritten for her, I watched Mr. Miller. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at the documents she was handing out to the board. I had replaced the cleaned-up versions of the research with my original handwritten field notes, pages that bore my distinctive left-handed slant, dated 3 years ago, with my university professor's red-inked critiques visible in the margins. The silence that followed wasn't immediate. It was a slow, agonizing crawl. It started with a frown from a board member on the left. Then Mr. Miller stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. He picked up one of the pages, his eyes narrowing. Elena, sensing the shift in the air, faltered mid-sentence. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice hitching a half-octave higher. Mr. Miller didn't answer her. He looked toward the back of the room, his gaze locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "Elena," Mr. Miller said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "This research is dated 2021. The notes refer to a thesis defense at State University. You graduated from a different college in 2023. And unless you've recently changed your dominant hand, these notes were written by someone else." Elena's face didn't just go pale. It turned a ghostly, translucent gray. She looked down at the folder, finally seeing the trap. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin one of her famous webs, but no sound came out. I stood up slowly. I didn't feel the rush of adrenaline I expected. I felt a profound, heavy sadness. I walked toward the front, my heels clicking rhythmically on the stone. "The research is mine, Mr. Miller," I said, my voice calm and unwavering. "My sister found my files and used them to apply. I allowed it to continue because I wanted to see if she would ever choose the truth over the prestige. She didn't." The room remained deathly quiet. I explained the process, the specific archival coding I had developed, and pointed out the nuances of the Landis papers that Elena couldn't even pronounce. The look of realization on her face was devastating. A mixture of terror, shame, and a sudden, sharp realization that her sister was no longer her shield. She looked small. For the first time in our lives, the golden child looked like a tattered reflection of someone else's light. The drive home was a descent into a different kind of hell. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the news had already reached our small town. Mrs. Gable from next door was standing on her porch, staring at our car with a look of morbid curiosity. My phone was buzzing with concerned texts from cousins and family friends. We walked into the house to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table, her face buried in her hands. My father was in his recliner, the television off, staring at nothing. The crumbled reputation I had feared wasn't a sudden explosion. It was the sound of a house becoming a tomb. "How could you?" my mother whispered, looking up at us. But she wasn't looking at Elena. She was looking at me. "You've ruined her, Clara. You've ruined all of us. What will people say? Your father, his heart. My father turned his head slowly. He looked at Elena, who was weeping silently against the doorframe. Then he looked at me. For a moment I expected the anger, the disappointment I had carried for years. But instead, his eyes filled with a weary, painful clarity. "I was a fool," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "I wanted the name to matter so much that I didn't care if the foundation was made of sand." The disappointment wasn't in me. It was a crushing final realization that the daughter he had pinned his legacy on was a stranger. Seeing him look at Elena with pity rather than pride was more painful than any scream could have been. Later that night I went to our shared bedroom to pack a bag. Elena was sitting on her bed, her makeup smeared, her silk dress wrinkled. "You have to fix this," she said, her voice devoid of its usual fire. "Call Mr. Miller. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him you gave me the papers. If you don't, I'll never be able to show my face in this town again. The family name. You care about it, don't you?" I paused, a pair of jeans in my hand. I looked at the room we had shared for 20 years. The space where I had always been the secondary character. "I used to care about it more than I cared about myself," I said quietly. "But the family name is just a word, Elena. You stole my life and you didn't even have the grace to be good at it. I'm not lying for you anymore. I'm not being the steady one while you play the star. You have to live with what you did." The no felt like a heavy stone being lifted off my chest. I saw the flash of realization in her eyes. The moment she understood that the safety net was gone. I felt a bittersweet pang of grief for the relationship we might have had, but it was overshadowed by the relief of finally being seen. A week later I walked back to the Miller archive. The sun was bright, warming the back of my neck, and for the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for a blow. I didn't have a folder of stolen dreams or a script of someone else's words. I walked through the doors and found Mr. Miller waiting in the lobby. He didn't offer a permanent job right away. He was a man of integrity after all, but he offered me a seat in the reading room and a chance to submit my own genuine application. As I sat down at a mahogany table, the light streaming through the high windows, I realized that a reputation built on lies is a prison, no matter how golden the bars. The weight was gone. I wasn't the shadow sister, or the steady one. I was just Clara. And as I opened a fresh notebook to the first page, I knew that the only life worth living was the one I had finally claimed as my own.